They tested the first test was a disaster. The first test actually, I think, had a missile failure. The missile that was being launched from failed. The second test was a success. The third test was a success. The fourth one, it crashed in the ocean. So, but the way they work is basically about the size of this room. It's just a big wedge, and underneath it is this engine. And this is a scramjet, and they're introducing hydrogen in this engine, but they can't get the hydrogen all the way through. So this is what it looks like underneath there. So the gas is coming in through here, and they introduce the hydrogen here. But in reality, only about half of that hydrogen or less, maybe a fourth of it, actually burns. And trying to keep this thing in flight is a major challenge. But they have accomplished some pretty significant things. This is what it looks like in flight. So it's flown at Mach 7 and 10 in 2004. And it's capable of getting up to about Mach 17 if they can get the system to work right. So they're working along. This is part of what they think will be a space plane. You can get it up at a high enough velocity in the atmosphere that they can actually coast it into space. And at least in theory, will be a lot cheaper when you get to space than just the heavy lift rockets that we go through. All right. So let's take a 3-minute break, and then we're going to talk about tools a little bit. All right. They have unions that enforce that rigorously. So, but you still should know about the tools and know how to use them, know what they're called. And so we'll go through a few tools and talking about tools right here. Let me make some comments about the quality of tools, though. So many of you have, and many of you will perhaps receive as wedding presents or something like that. A $50 tool set or something somebody bought some greasy place. You can pay an enormous amount for tools, so it's not actually completely true to pay for what you get. But at the $50 level, the tools are probably going to break the first time you do something significant. So Craftsman kind of quality tools, that's kind of a mainstream tool brand that's sold by a lot of people now. Those are completely adequate. I've worked on my own vehicles my whole life. There are much better tools. The highest quality ones I know of that I've ever used are called Snap-on tools. They're way out of my range in terms of their price, but they're a very impressive set of tools. But they might be 3 or 4% better than Craftsman tool, and they cost 5 or 6 times as much. So, but if you're spending just a little bit for tools, not only is the tool going to break, but there's safety concerns. So let me just encourage you, just don't get tools unless you can get tools that actually are cheaper. So, and I'm not advertising Craftsman. There are a lot of brands of the Craftsman variety that are good tools, but there's a whole bunch of people who put some sort of shiny covering on a piece of pot metal and put it into a tool bag and sell it to people for relatively little money. And they only will serve you well if you never have to use them, right? So let's start with the bolts, screws, and nuts. All right. So there are metal screws, and there are wood screws, of course, and there are bolts and nuts. So a bolt is the thing. The bolt screws into a threaded receptacle of some sort. A nut goes on the end of it. So bolts don't necessarily have nuts on them. Bolts frequently just they screw into a block of metal of some sort that will be there. Screws, though, metal screws. At some level, there's a kind of a subtle distinction between a metal screw and a metal bolt. But for the most part, metal screws, and you'll be taking those off of most of these engines. They're pointy on one end. Bolts almost never are. These are kind of sharp on one end. And if the thread is what's holding them together, it's only a thin piece of metal that they're being threaded through. So not something that's as thick as a nut or a block of metal. And so bolts and nuts are meant to be removed mostly by wrenches. So there are lots of different kinds of wrenches. This end of the wrench is called an open end wrench for maybe obvious reasons. And you'll note that the center of this wrench is, and your calibrated eye should be able to say that's 15 degrees off of the straight portion of the wrench. So, and they're all 15 degrees. So if you have a choice, this wrench wants to be put onto a bolt or nut and pulled this direction so that you pull into the bite of that 15 degree is a small consideration compared to just being able to get this on the pole, however you have to do it, and being able to move it anyway. So just however you can do it is so this end is called a box end wrench, and the box end wrench is straight in terms of, you can't tell that it's rotated like this. But if you look at this, notice that the open end wrench is flat, the box end wrench is not flat, and this is 15 degrees, it turns out again, all right? So it's built this way so that you can set this over a nut or a bolt and twist it, and frequently there's something else close by that you're trying to get around, so this is built this way so that you can try to not have to worry about that. So open end and closed end wrench. But mostly what you're going to use are sockets and ratchets, and so this is a very small ratchet, so you can tell that it's a ratchet because, so I don't know if you need to hear that, but it makes a little ratcheting sound when you're turning it the wrong way, all right? So if you put it on here and you turn it like that and nothing's happening, then there is, on all ratchets, there's either a little switch here or a button or something that you have to push, and that changes this from tightening to loosening whatever you're putting on there. The drive, this portion of it is called the drive, and these of course come in a variety of sizes, both metric and English sizes. But whether they're metric or English, the drive is always either a 1/4 inch, this is a 1/4 inch drive, or a 1/2 inch, or a 3/4 inch drive. So that part is always measured in English units. So this size of this hole and this part here, even if this is a metric one, this is going to be either, I'm sorry, it's 3/8, 1/2, or 3/4 inch drive. So you just snap that on here, and then you can rotate it this way. And so you turn it like this, and you can turn it just a small distance, and it ratchets back. And these are by far the most used tools for trying to get things off, because you can, so these come in lots of different kinds as well that you may or may not have noticed. So I'll start these around so you can look at them as they go around. So many of you I know have been through this, but so these are 6-sided or 12-sided, 12-point or 6-point they call it. So the 12-sided ones are actually more common, but the difference is that so I'll send these around, but just look in there, you can see there's a different number of points, different number of sides. So the 12-sided ones are a little easier to get onto things. You don't have to rotate them as far. But if you really have a stubborn nut or bolt, which at least 30% of them are very stubborn, the 6-sided one actually is less likely to strip the corners off. It's a stronger and better system to use. Now, you might also sometimes, if you go to a shop, if you've been somewhere where you see people using air drives, like getting your tires rotated or something like that, they always use something like this. You've seen that sound that's driven by air pressure. And I don't know if you've noticed, but they always have a black-looking system. This is a 1/2 inch drive, air drive, and the nut goes, and the socket. This is another socket. But here's something important for you to know. So this drive, these sockets will go on this drive, and you can try to use them that way. But there is a fairly realistic chance that this is going to break and be thrown all over the place. So this is built for, this one I think has 1,500 foot-pounds torque in it. So that's a lot of torque, way more than any hand tool was ever built to take. So no human being can generate that much torque no matter how long the wrench you get. You can't generate that much torque on a bolt. So these sockets are built for these kind of high torque things. So if you're ever going to use an air drive system, make sure that you have available to you appropriate, and that they are always black. I don't know why. Somewhere is written that these have to be black. But these black drives, they don't look nearly as shiny and pretty as those ones, but they're stronger. They're built for the much higher torque, and so that system will work much better. Other kinds of wrenches that you should be familiar with. So if you're serious about doing any real work, you need what's called a torque wrench. So there's 2 things about torque wrenches that are important. At least 2 reasons you want one. One is that torque wrenches usually have longer handles than any other wrench. And you are always going to get to a situation where you're wishing you had something with a longer handle. Because you can't loosen the bolt or the nut that you're trying to loosen with stubby little thing that you have. So get a piece of pipe and put on the end of it, that sometimes works, or a hammer on the end of it. Don't ever do that. I've seen that happen before. So, so this long handle gives you much more torque. More importantly, this is adjustable, so that if you look at the bottom of it here, you can dial in whatever torque you want to be able to tighten this, and when it gets to, I'm going to dial this back to see if I can generate. I may not be able to get it low enough to quick. So when you tighten this up, then when it gets to the torque that you set it at, yeah, I need something to put it on. It will click, so you're pulling on it, and when you'll click it, it will shake a little bit, and that's when you know you've torqued you put as much pressure on it as that bolt or nut wants. So, for example, just changing your tires is frequently not done properly. So, typical lug nuts on tires, depending on how big your tire is, they want to have a minimum of 70 or 80 foot-pounds, up to about 140 to 150. So, on my truck, I think it's 175 actually on my truck. So 175 foot-pounds is, so this is 2 feet long, so 175 foot-pounds, 180 foot-pounds means that I'm pulling with 90 pounds pressure at the end of this thing, and that's how tight it wants to be. So 90 pounds is a lot of pressure. That's that same pressure would just twist some things right off of things. So whenever you're working on, so your car, if you're changing your car, you should know what the torque should be, and you should torque the bolts down to the right. So if you overdo them, you're going to ruin either the threads or the nuts, and if you undo them, the nut has a chance of working itself loose, and that's of course bad for your tires. So you need a torque wrench to be able to do that, and that's actually a big part of what tire shops do. Almost every tire shop now have 2 people check the torques on those things, just because the consequence of not having it right can be severe. So when you take them in there, so that's called a torque wrench. I forgot my Allen wrenches, but I have a picture of some I'll show you here in just a minute. We'll look at Allen wrenches. So Allen wrenches are little, they're also called hex wrenches. They're little wrenches that go into inside of things that turn things up. So most of those things you will use some component of those in your work. So most of these engines still have spark plugs in them, and so they make special wrenches. The depth of this is referred to as the throat. So sockets that are deep-throated sockets. So that's a deep-throated socket. This is the same size socket in the standard size. So you can use deep-throated ones. There's lots of times when you need to use them. One of them is a spark plug. So the spark plug sits out here, and this needs to go over the spark plug and get all the way down to where you can turn it. And so it needs to be tall enough to be able to do that. There are only about 3 sizes of spark plugs, so they make specific spark plug wrenches for those 3 sizes that you can use to take the spark plug out. In your case, if for some reason you can't get the spark plug out, since you know you're not going to replace it, you can just you can use an open-end wrench on here, or in this case, you can probably get a box wrench to fit on it, or if you end up just having to break it off, or take it off the regular socket, that's not going to be putting this spark plug back in. So, but be careful, because that's ceramic material that's pretty sharp. All right, so let's look at the tool file and go through. Any questions about? Oh, there's 2 things I want to do before we do the tools. I wanted to look at this. This shows an engine being put together. This is a Deutz engine, but it's really cool. So that's called the block, and that's the biggest, heaviest part of the engine. That's the crankshaft for, in this case, a 4-cylinder engine. And so coming onto those are the bearings, the connector rods, the pistons. The pistons are getting put on with their bearings. So there's the 4 pistons going into the 4 cylinders. They're in the block, and then this is the bearing for the crankshaft, and a few miscellaneous components. That's actually the timing wheel, that goes on here, and this is the header. So this is what sits on top of the block where the valves and all of those things are. So that goes on to, so first you have to load it up. There's the valves. Those are the fuel valves and the exhaust valves coming in. So the valves are all installed. Valve covers, which, and then these are the camshafts that came up on the top of there. The camshafts get bolted down. You just saw that gasket come on. That's the head gasket that we talked about. And so the header gets bolted to the block. The head gaskets between those. And now come things like the water pump. Oh, the timing chain. So remind me to talk about, that was the timing chain, that long one. Remind me to talk about that. That's important for you to understand as well. And just some covers for those things. This is called the tappet cover. That goes over the very top. It also has a gasket, way less expensive gasket because there's no pressure in there to speak of. It just covers the top of the engine. And this is the oil pan that goes on the bottom. Inside the oil pan is the oil pump. So you see them installing the oil pump there. And then that sits on the very bottom of the engine where the oil goes, and that gets bolted onto the bottom. Now come things, this is the starter, part of the exhaust gas recirculation system. The starter motor goes on to, this is the flywheel, it's toothed on the outside, so that's how you start your engine. This is an electric motor that starts it turning around. Once it gets turning, that pulls itself back in. So that was, then there comes the fuel manifold, so that's where the fuels come in. They get preheated on the block first. Those green things are the fuel injectors, fuel lines that go to the fuel injectors, spark plugs there, and this is the water pump. It circulates the water through the engine, comes onto the system. That's the driver for the water pump. That's just a coaster. Pretty soon they'll put the, goes on the end of the crankshaft, which turns the belt that's going to go on here. The alternator just came on, power steering pump. Another idler arm, and then, oh, there's the alternator. The other one must have been the power steering. And then the fan belt, or serpentine belt is what they really call it these days, exhaust manifold, and you've got the engine belt, just that fast. It takes a lot longer, it does. So this is how it's working. So you can see all of the things we talked about working, and I'll actually show in some illustration here the dynamics of how this works. So the piston's coming up. I'll focus in on one of these pistons here in just a minute. So slow it down and watch us. I'll just watch how it's working. All right, so here's just one individual piston. This is the diagram, like the diagram we saw. So the fuel injector injects the fuel on the back of the valve, then the valve opens, pulls the air in, the air gets, so the air just got pulled in, gets compressed, spark goes off, pushes it down. And this is, you've probably heard of dual valve engines. So this is a dual valve engine, meaning you have two valves on both sides, because getting the air in and out of an engine is actually one of the major parts of the inefficiency of the engine. And so getting as much valve area as you can in and out of the engine helps the efficiency fairly significantly. So now you see the cams operating at the top, and so you can watch them opening and closing the valves. So this is an overhead cam engine. We have several of those out in my truck. So the cams, overhead valve and overhead cams, so the cams are above the valve. In lawnmower engines, the cam is usually down here, and the valves are on the side of the piston, and they open and close on the side instead of at the top of the piston. The fuel has to kind of come up and scoot across the top and into the cylinder. So so you'll see a lot of gasoline engines with the power. So that is, I thought, a fairly good illustration of how this actually all comes together. All right, so last thing, 5 minutes. Let me just go quickly through some. I found some pretty good tools things that I wanted to review. So this actually comes out of the handbook. So these are wrenches. So the way wrenches are built is they're usually forged, which means you have a mold that you pour molten metal into, and this is what the wrench looks like. and then somebody comes by and grinds off all of this excess material here and actually forms the wrench. So the reason they're formed is it'd actually be stronger if you were to cut them out, but they're just way easier to make this way. We talked about open and box end wrenches. I think I posted this. I forgot to talk about adjustable wrench. This is frequently called the crescent wrench. Crescent is a brand name, not a description. So an adjustable wrench, you just turn this knob. This one wrench kind of can play the role of a whole bunch of wrenches, and they're actually pretty good unless you have to do something. But they're not really good if you're really tugging on them hard. But they're really helpful for not having to have a whole bunch of wrenches in hand. So flare nut wrenches or line wrenches, these are used frequently on fuel lines, on engines, and other kinds of pressure fittings. Their main advantage is they go almost all the way around the nut, but you can still slip them over the fuel line would go here, and then you set it over the nut. And because those are really high pressure systems, the torque on those is sometimes very high, and an open end wrench runs the chance of stripping the edges off of there. So this is almost as good as a box end wrench, except that at the box end wrench you couldn't get over the fuel line. So this lets you get over the fuel line and use a box end wrench type of a thing. So ratchets and sockets and breaker bars, and talked about the sizes and types and number of points. This is a torque wrench being used to torque down, in this case, the bearing bolts on the crankcase. Torque wrenches, by the way, need to be calibrated routinely. So deep socket, regular socket ones. Screwdrivers, so this is what some people call a spade, straight, or flat screwdriver, or what when my kids were little was a minus screwdriver, as opposed to the plus screwdriver, which is this one, which is more properly called a Phillips head screwdriver. There's a bunch of other kinds of screwdriver heads, the most common of which that you'll run into, especially on electronic parts, is a Torx Seymour X screwdriver, which is a 5-pointed star that you put in. They originally built those so that people wouldn't try to work on stuff themselves. Now everybody has those, so they come up with other ways to keep people working on. So sometimes screws can be really stubborn. So they actually make an impact driver. You put a screwdriver on here, you hit it with a hammer. It's built to be hit with a hammer, and it turns that into a lot of torque that you can drive a screw off. There are different kinds of hammers. It's a ball peen hammer. More commonly, you'll have either a framing hammer, which looks like this, kind of like this on one end, and has relatively straight claws, sometimes called a straight claw hammer, or a curved claw hammer, finishing hammer, which has a lot more curvature to the system, usually smaller weight, and the others have a kind of a waffle stamp. These are mallets that get used usually when you're frustrated and getting a little desperate. So better than a hammer, but still not great. So pliers. I guess everybody knows how pliers work and how to use them. So these multi-groove adjustable, or some people call these water pump pliers, are very common and very useful. These are linesman pliers. These get used mostly for, used a lot in electronic things. So you have cutters that cut electrical wires and can adjust systems. Diagonal pliers, or just wire cutters is what some people call these. They're used for. So you probably won't have these, although they're common on engines. So I don't think on the ones you're taking apart. We have a cotter pin that goes right through the bolt, and this nut has these slots in it, and you finally line these up and put pins through there. And that's to make sure that nut can never come loose. So the pin holds it tight to the place where you always have those on the wheels, not your tires, but the wheels that hold the hubs on. So always have cotter pins in them, or other critical places where something working this would be catastrophic. Needle nose pliers, locking pliers. So these are also frequently called vice grips. That's a brand name again, but that's what almost everybody calls them. And so these ones you adjust some tension in here, and then you squeeze it down, and it locks onto the nut. And you can get, so these are usually used after you a nut or a bolt and you can't get a hold of it with a regular wrench anymore. You can sometimes get a hold of it with this. If that doesn't work, there are other more desperate measures just to show. This is how you get rings on and off. It's an internal ring or an external ring. So the rings on your engine come off. They actually have a different tool for those. Files, kin snips, utility knife. Just show you some of these desperation tools. So this is a, so things go really bad, you can't get a nut or off of a bolt, and you finally just say, I'm going to sacrifice the nut. So you put this nut splitter on there, you put the nut right here, screw this down, and it actually fractures the nut, and you have to take it off in pieces, and now it comes off. So usually, if you're at that point, you've done something badly wrong. And similar with bolts, so what happens if you can't get the bolt out? So you actually screw a hole in the back of the bolt, and you use what is usually called technically an extractor, but the brand name is Easy Out. Almost everybody uses them as an Easy Out. So if you look at this, you can see if I rotate this in the direction as it gets tighter, it's actually in the direction that's going to pull the bolt out. So as you make that, as that drills into the bolt, as that drills into the bolt, you rotate it this way into the bolt. So that's going to extract the bolt so that you get a good grip on it. My experience is that these are supposed to be multi-use tools, but frequently end up, these are really hard steel because they have to be to drive that bolt out when they break for reason. So they're fairly brittle because they're so hard. So I got a bunch of them that are broken off. So finally, this is the wax trick, and then we'll end here. So trying to get a bolt off, one way you can get something off, if it won't work any other way, is you actually take a torch to it and you heat it up red hot, and then take a candle while it's red hot and melt the candle on it. And as it cools down, it shrinks and it opens up a little bit of a gap, and the wax flows down into that gap, and that lubricates it a little bit so you can try to kind of back it off. So that's like WD-40 on steroids, and that's so usually by the time I get to this point, I've given up taking it to a real mechanic. But I've seen real mechanics do this same thing. So those are some things about that. So any questions about any of that? All right, so let's take the last, well, we don't have the last 2 minutes. Please get, before you leave here, get yourself together. I'll tell you what, if you have access to tools, if you can stand along this wall over here, and make sure you get paired up with somebody that has access to tools. And if you don't, let me know, and we will plan, I will just plan on, unless everybody finds somebody that has tools, I will plan on 8 o'clock, I'll send you an email with the address.
So, can we just take the engine?
Oh, your engine, yeah. So before noon today, just go out in the back of that truck and claim an engine, all right? So they range from, well, I was going to show you this.